Well, I mean, it's a bit unexpected. I'm very happy that you're excited about cooperatives in Zurich. I am Max from Comuna, which is a non-profit organization based in Brussels, mostly working around issues of temporary use and abandoned buildings. We exist since 2013. Well, basically, then we met people who were doing the same thing, like gathering in their cities and discovering that there are so many empty places, and at the same time, people who were looking for space. We met, and some of them are here tonight, people from Latvia, from Italy, from France, and then we created a network called STAN, Social Temporary Use Network, where we said, hey, we have the same questions in our cities, we should exchange and meet. And then among all these questions that we share and these problematics, one of them was that when we have a building and then we occupy it and we make great project and we can host people and do interesting things, then after a while the buildings often are taken back by the owners, and then, you know, to give a very cliche example, which actually never happened, but we always say, like, they tear down the building and then they build a McDonald's instead, and then we feel, wow, we've been doing this project for nothing. But that's a bit like to exaggerate. But another way could be all these questions about, like, how are we actually contributing on long term to change the city for good? We're doing good stuff, we're trying to do our best on short terms, but then we said, hey, we want to think of our impact also doing long term, and from this short term temporary use project to long term positive project for the city. And so together we launched this initiative called Degentrify, which is a weird title. I mean, it doesn't mean much, but it's like appealing apparently because you're all here tonight. So it worked, it's great marketing. And so the question was, okay, so there are these questions of gentrification, everybody speak about it, and then we said, okay, are we actually contributing to that? What is gentrification actually? And then among these reflections, we looked a bit around what was happening in different countries, in different cities. And I mean, here in Brussels, there's the Community Land Trust, which is working actively around this question of speculation and affordable housing. There are many different initiatives, but then we found out that in Zurich, they have these, and mostly in Switzerland, they have these housing cooperatives which work with anti-speculative systems, and we found them very appealing and exciting, to the point that we thought, let's bring them to Brussels, and they can exchange with us, and we can get inspired by their work, and maybe challenge it together. And that's the point of tonight. Housing cooperatives in Zurich, how can we bring them to Brussels? So welcome. We have three amazing speakers with us tonight. So we have Res from Quelles, Zurich. He actually gave me a title that I will read properly. I mean, he said that he's a project and cooperative developer. So Res will be speaking about Quelles. That will be the beginning. He will introduce a bit what they do, mostly in like the system in Zurich, how these cooperatives are actually working. And then Hélène will speak, and she's a cooperative housing program manager at Community Land Trust of Brussels, CLTB, that probably a lot of you already know. And then Kristiaan, the bouwmeester, maître architect, will give a perspective on Brussels and how, I mean, we'll discuss that this way. Well, for many people, we started already late. I propose that we just go. And, oh yeah, different logistics, very important. We have toilets in this place. It's there. So if you need, just go. And there will be drinks and, not so much, but like drinks after the presentation. We'll have these three presentations, and then we'll have time for discussion among them and then with us. Is that good? Yes? Welcome.
Thank you, Max. So my English is very bad, but I try. Max came to Zurich 1 year ago, I think. But I have to say that the capital of cooperative housing and also of affordable housing is Vienna. You have to go to Vienna to look how they do it. But I'm showing you how it is working in Zurich. And I made this presentation, and So I start. The cooperatives is a really old model or an old type of commercial organization. I think it's the first. It was widespread in the Middle Ages also, and I learned about it when I was young. So when I was in my 20s, and I worked as a cowboy and cheesemaker in the Swiss Alps. And I'm this guy here, second from left. But I came in contact a lot later with in Zurich with the cooperatives. The first cooperatives, the first housing cooperatives in Zurich were started at the end of the 19th century. In the workers' movements we had there. It's like maybe you know here also the food cooperatives or the Coop, for example. You also have Coop, I think, and it's all those cooperatives emerging from the workers' movements. They started in the beginning of the 20th century, and they got a boost in the 20s and 30s when Zurich had a socialist government or a socialist majority in the parliament also. And they made a lot for these cooperatives, and they developed some rules I will show you after. The cooperatives worked or built a lot until maybe the 1970s. They built the stock of what we have now of cooperative buildings and cooperative housing. But then but also the city, from the beginning of the 20th century to the 70s, they built a lot of own affordable housing or social housing blocks like this. This is so-called Lochergut. It's the neighbor of Cooperative. It's a great building, I think, from '65. But then also in Switzerland, in Zurich, we had a neoliberal mode, I would say, or neo-fashion. In this time, maybe for 20 years, it ended at the end of the 90s. And in this period, the cooperative or the social or affordable housing was quite sleeping, and it needed the push. The cooperatives needed the push of new cooperatives emerging in the 90s, emerging from people who were engaged in the 80s social movement, youth movement at Zurich. It was a great period. And I will this is Cooperative, and I will show afterwards a little bit about this project. But first, this is Zurich. Zurich is maybe a third of Brussels. It has 430,000 inhabitants and 220,000 flats, and 19% of them is made and owned by cooperatives. But there are a lot of other players in the affordable or non-profit housing sector. There are mainly the city building herself, there is, but also some foundations for housing made or created by the city, so, some years and also 100 years ago, and all those players together, they have 27%. But it's too less because we have a real need of affordable housing in this town. And so in 2011, there was a popular initiative. You know that in Switzerland, the people or a group of the people, a group can collect signatures for some ideas, and then you have a popular votation. And there was this project of a votation about a share of a third of the complete housing sector to be a non-profit. And it was accepted, approved, and we should have it until 2050. But it's really, really, really hard. So in these 12 years since the votation, we couldn't make bigger this share. But you can see the city's plan and all those arrows in so purple, working and progressing and expanding. And the rest, 150, are maybe small cooperatives as that, but it's important also. And also the city has, as you can see, the blue spots, they have a lot of housing in this neighborhood. So I explain shortly how that system, that cooperation between the city and the cooperatives functions. It goes back to 1906. So then the city started or made rules for this cooperation. And they said, we sell to the land to the cooperatives, or we give it in a long-term lease, and the land price isn't the market price, but it is fixed by the possible utilization, and yeah. Or what is the right word in English? What you can do on the land, how the use, how high and how many flats you can build. Capacity, okay. Depending of the type of use, this is between 13 and 20% of the total investment costs, included the land cost. And nowadays, you often have 50% of the total in the market era. You have 50% or 60% of the total costs are land costs, and that's that is the background of what is going wrong. But to get that, the housing rents have to be calculated according to some rules of the coast rent. And I think you know what it means. Coast rent, finally, it's a complicated system, but it means you don't afford money on the housing, you only pay what it costs. And it's controlled by the city. And also the construction costs are limited. So you can't build very luxury housing, and then because then the rents would be also too high to be affordable. So the construction costs are limited, and sometimes the city can or there is also subsidized housing required. So you have to make it. And 1% of the spaces have to be available for public social infrastructure, such as kindergarten or meeting point, things like that. But that's a profit for the cooperatives. The pension fund of the city gives loans up to 94% of the investment costs. It means it's the gap between the bank. The bank gives us, I don't know how it's here in Brussels, but in Switzerland, the banks give you 80% of the total costs, maximum, and you have to bring 20%. And to bring 20%, it's very, very, very hard for a cooperative, especially for a new one, because it would mean for one flat you have to bring maybe 60 or 80,000 euros. And it wouldn't be a social project. And on this background, the city decided to invest her own pension fund. And it's really, really big and a great instrument. And leaseholds, I mean, en français c'est droit de superficie. I hope that everybody knows about this type of property. The leaseholds, they last 60 years normally, and then can be prolonged on other 30 years. And if you have a leasehold, you have to invest, you have to make a fund or a renewal fund with 1% of the total investment cost every year, and 0.5% in an amortization fund. It means that you have to renew periodically your building, so that at the end of the 60 or 90 years it goes back to the city, and the city will have a good and intact building. Or if you didn't make it, the city gets the whole renewal fund. That's the background of this cooperation. And now I can show you shortly. What's the time?
Half of your
Half? Oh, that's great. So let's speak about Cooperative. Maybe it's not new. It's not a 19 or not a project of the 90s. It's more recent. We started it in 2006, and I made other projects, other cooperative projects before, but that was maybe the project who had the most and the best impact on and yeah. That was the area owned by the city, and it was a tram parking. So only for tram cars, and it was a parking in free air, in the open space, but in the middle of the city. So in 2006, a small group of neighbors and invited publicly to a workshop to think about what we could do with this area, because there was a project of the transport company of the city of Zurich to renew the whole area, but further as an open tram parking. And we said it can't be. We have to do something there. We have to do housing and to work also, and to make a public space of it. We invited publicly, and it was around 50 participants who came for a weekend. It had big echo, and in this weekend, in this workshop, we developed our vision for this era under the title Ein neues Stück Stadt. It means a new piece of the city. And this was the design we made of all the uses. We really wanted to make a mixed use building with different types of housing for groups, for families, for lonely people, and a lot of in the basement or in the first floors. A lot of different commerce and also culture. We founded an association. That was our poster for the association. Let's make a new piece of the city. And we made big noise in the city and also in the city's parliament, because they had to decide over this project of the transport company. And after 4 months, they decided that they will stop the project of the transport company, and they will give or make a competition between cooperatives to make a housing and mixed-use project. We made a bid also, and we only were an association, but we said we will found a cooperative, and with our concept we won this competition. So since I think it was the first time the city of Zurich made something like that, a competition between cooperatives, because nowadays you can't give as a city, you can't give some land to this cooperative or to the other, and all the others will say, why don't you give it to us? So they make competitions, but it's not an architectural competition, it's more a competition for ideas and visions, and how would you make it and what will you make it. I think 4 or 5 other competitions like that for new lands and for new grote superficie. And so we won it, and we founded our cooperative, and we developed in it's too I'm sorry. Like that, we developed the competition for the architects. You know, you have to have a concrete idea of what you will do, of what you want to do, if you make a competition for architects. And we had maybe more than a half year to make it. finally we made it, and it was an international competition. We had bureaus from India and from Mexico participating. We had to do it because it was also the land was owned or is owned by the city of Zurich, and that's the international laws that if you have a project of this type or of this scale, you have to make an international competition. But the bureau, the winning bureau, it was anonymous, but the winning bureau was maybe 300 meters away from Coopérative. So they knew the best what is to do. Here you can see how this building is organized. So the trams are still on the ground floor, and the house is built on the sides and over this tram garage. It's we have 88 flats and 5,000 square meters of commercial space, but also 600 square meters of common spaces. Because we made a concept of room sharing also, so we said every room you don't need daily, you could share or you have to share it, like as guest rooms or working space and in your flat and things like that. We have also textile ateliers and yeah, a lot of things. And that's included in this 600 square meters of common spaces. And also all the terraces are common. We don't have individual balconies, or only a few ones. And you can see that in the middle of the building, on top of the tram garage, it's a huge green space, and this also was fixed in the contract with the city, the land lease contract. We have to open this space for the public, because in our neighborhood there is too less of green space, and so the city can make 5 minutes, huh? Yeah. City can make or yeah, things like that. Also, it was built until 2014. It means 8 years after the workshop. After the first workshop, it was finished, and we invested 64 million of Swiss francs. It's around 60 million of euros. But the costs we wanted was we could hold it. And the result was that we have 260 inhabitants. We have a social mixture respecting the age, the origin, but also income and the Bildung. Education. We have a cinema with 5 rooms, 5 cinema rooms. We have 4 bars and restaurants in the house, and a lot of shops and bureaus, and total of 200 working places. And I think our goals, all the goals of the first workshop of 8 years before we arrived, we could make it, and even more, because a lot of things like the room sharing concept, etc., we didn't. It came in the process. All those ideas came in the process. So yeah, it was a big thing, I think, for the city of Zurich, and also for more. You can see how the public green space is placed on the top of the tram garage here. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Hello everyone. So I will be speaking, I'm Hélène. I will be speaking about the situation in Brussels, where we also have 27% of cooperative housing. Absolutely. So consider myself speaking from the point of view of a city where we are really at the beginning of cooperative housing development. So I could be like Res, like a few years ago, decades ago. Imagine how would it be maybe at the beginning of the work for cooperative housing in Brussels. But we do believe in it, and for myself, I discovered cooperative housing a few years back, and as a Belgian, I didn't grow up with this idea of cooperative housing. I grew up with this idea of the life goal achievement of being a private property owner. That's how I'm going to succeed in life. And so when I discovered cooperative housing, I realized that something else exists, that actually you could get the feeling of property while collectively own an organization that would give you forever a right of use of housing. And so that was kind of mind-blowing for me. And so my little advice for you, if I may give you a little advice, for the people who are discovering cooperative housing tonight, would be gentle with yourself. If you also grew up with this idea of private property being like the #1 target, don't worry, it might take time. Or it just means that I have a very slow brain, which is also possible. But now I got it. I've embraced this idea of cooperative housing. I'm deeply into it, but where do I speak from tonight? I speak from another organization that's called Community Land Trust Bxl, and we represent the movement of CLTs around the world. Who knows about CLTs and CLTB here? Please raise your hand. Yeah, that's great. So CLTB, what do? We are an organization that develops permanently affordable housing projects in Brussels for people with limited means on community land that is owned collectively. So we exist since 10 years. And what could be the difference with cooperative housing? The difference would be that here in CLTs the land is collectively owned, but the building is privately owned. So that's a big difference with cooperative housing, I believe. But what's the link then between CLTs and cooperative? Why is CLTB now interested in cooperative? It's because we, on a regular basis, we are receiving demands from people who are identifying CLTB as a good solution for their housing alternative projects. They identify CLTB as a solution, but we cannot answer to their demands until we found our very kind financial partner, the cooperative Sarah. So now we are able to allocate resources to find a solution for this big demand and these social needs in Brussels. But what social needs am I talking about? So I could try to categorize it into three dimensions. First one would be that those people are really interested in sharing space, in collective space for housing. Another target is important dimension is that they would like to have the feeling of ownership, but in a non-speculative way. They don't want to play in the private residential market that we are seeing right now in Brussels. And they're also looking for affordability and permanent affordability. And the last dimension would be that they would like very much to participate in the building, in the construction process, and also after, once all the work and the 60 millions are spent, they would also like to participate in the governance of the building. So, that's what they are looking for, that's the social needs we are facing. I'm pretty sure that lots of you are recognizing in these social needs. And so, actually, why could be cooperative a solution to answer to social needs? It's because it's simply answering to all of it. And actually, the picture you're seeing is the only cooperative we have in Brussels. We have one. That's already something, it's a good beginning, and it just happened that our foundation is the owner of the land that's hosting this great cooperative. We are very thankful that they exist, because thanks to them, they are enabling us to show to different actors that it is possible. You can create cooperative housing in the current system. So thank you, village from passage in French. But it's very difficult to build cooperative housing. You heard us talking. Right now we are facing lots of obstacles. And on the individual perspective, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of money. To be able to climb this very scary mountain and make it. And on top of that, there is also, on the macro level, Belgium is really not a cooperative housing friendly land and country, because our cooperative, the cooperative is considered as a for-profit enterprise on the legal frame of cooperative. And so it means that as a cooperative, that main goal and target is to generate not-for-profit housing, it has to prove that it makes profits. So when you go to the bank and ask for a loan, and that you show your financial plan that after 30 years you will reach break-even, the bank is just going to basically laugh at you. So, so it's quite difficult. And we heard us talking about that at the first stage of a cooperative, we need 20% of funds in capital money to make it. And so, on top of that, cooperatives are really not competitive on the real estate market, as in a lot of cities across Europe and the world, we are seeing that the market is very difficult, and yeah, we are not sexy, basically. And that's pretty it. So, I hope it is, I don't know if there are many of you from Brussels here, but I'm sure that in some of your cities it can be the same. But it's not a cold shower for me, because solutions exist. So, right now we are in the process where we have some cooperative, but imagine if we would get all the support that we've just witnessed with Res in Zurich, if we would get better access to land and building, if we would get financial support, if we would get a specific legal frame and a professional vehicle to develop all those community-led housing wishes and needs, imagine we could have not only some, but much more cooperative. And that's the goal. That's what we are going for with CLTB. And now I will explain you a bit how we are doing it, are trying to do it, and what are next steps and actions. So, that's the plan. We are here in 2023, and so we are studying which cooperative model could be the best, and we are working with 3 pilot projects. I will tell you more about it later. And then in 2024, we will produce and develop the cooperative. Then maybe in 2025 there would be a little bit more cooperative. But if we would get supported development and all the enablers that Res just talked about in Zurich and that are also doable in Brussels, we would get a lot of cooperative. So that's the plan. And what are our goals right now? So our goal is to put cooperative housing on the political agenda. We have the chance that in 2024 we will have a lot of elections in Belgium and in Brussels. So that's one of our current goals. We are also working with 3 pilot projects, as I said. All of them are great. So Super Voisin is a very small project, but with huge ambitions, because they want to finance a partner so that the partner would buy the land, and they want to collectively make the land permanently affordable and build their project on top of that. Then we have a soon-to-be maybe cooperative called COBA. I do believe there are some members of this soon-to-be cooperative in the room. Maybe they would like to explain it themselves or not?
Right now?
In 2 sentences?
Basically, COBA was founded when we went to see Res, and we saw Borret, and we said, okay, we're going to do the same thing in Brussels. So the idea is to do what he did in Brussels. On that scale, if you can.
With that budget, because it's not the first time that actors in Brussels are trying to have more cooperative housing. But I do believe it's a good time, because there is a burning issue, because we have a lot of actors involved around this program, because we have financial support, and we are also very motivated, as always. So it is time. So please join us. So that's unfortunately not a picture of our last meeting, but it could be. It's a picture of the last year General Assembly of CLTB, but that could be us. And our next meeting is 7 October. You can email me if you want to join and participate. It would be really funny. And let's go for cooperative in Brussels. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène. Kristiaan, let's go.
Good evening. Also from my side, I'm very happy that there are many people here interested in this subject. I have a presentation that will tell a bit about how we see that we can do something about affordability of housing in Brussels, and especially on cooperative housing. But as there are some people from abroad, Max asked me to shortly explain what the bouwmeester architect is. So it's something specific for Belgium. In many cities, in other regions as well, in Flanders, you have a bouwmeester, appointed since the 2000s, more or less. And then the last part of Belgium that is lacking, in fact, is Wallonia, where the current government promised that they would make a bouwmeester during their term, which did not happen yet. So let's hope it's for the next term. What is the bouwmeester? So, what it is not. So, I'm a public official, I'm a civil servant, but I'm not the head of the planning administration, for instance. I'm also not the one that is making the projects, the building programs of the city itself. I'm not the one that is deciding on permits, so I'm not something like a chief city architect that is existing in several cities abroad. So it's similar, but not exactly the same. I'm also not just a consultant and surely not a politician. So what is the bouwmeester? The bouwmeester is a public official appointed by the government, but working in an independent position. So I'm paid to be critical. So it needs a wise government to do that. And what are we doing? We are in charge of, very generally, improving the design quality, so the spatial quality, architectural quality of all urban development projects in Brussels. So from time to time I'm saying we, because we are a team of 15 people, several people are here. So the bouwmeester is appointed for a term of 5 years, working in an independent way, but working very closely with the architects on the one side, the designers, and with the government on the other side. So we are in and out of the system. In this kind of room, I'm the one that is, most of all of you, establishment. But in another room, the bouwmeester is the one that is, most of all, non-government, outside of the system. And so this kind of bridge function, I think, is really interesting. What do? We organize a lot of competitions. Competitions in Belgium are not compulsory, are not imposed, so we have to convince sometimes private developers to organize competitions. We organize competitions in architecture and urban planning, something like 50 a year, 1 a week. We do research by design. That means in our team there are some people drawing, making projects, designing, not because we want to build them themselves, but because we want to use them to feed the debate on quality. So sometimes when there is a bad project, we draw another version to show it and look, this would be better. Sometimes if a project, an urban planning project, for instance in the government, is discussed just in terms of square meters, Excel tables, spreadsheets, we will build 30,000 square meters, then we make some drawings how 30,000 square meters would look like. And in some cases it looks horrible, and the drawing helps the people to conclude, okay, then we will not make 30,000 square meters, the density is too high. So we use our medium of architects in order to feed the debate and direct the debate. And the last thing is the classical thing. It's when there is a building permit in Brussels above 5,000 square meters, you have to, when you apply for a building permit, you have to join a review of the quality of your project by BMA, by us, to the building permit. So it helps to improve the quality of a lot of projects. You've understood, it's about soft power. So we are not deciding on things, but we are advising, pushing. You could say we do nothing, but we push a lot of people to do a lot of things. We try to change things. And so that's why I think we are useful for supporting more cooperative housing in Brussels. Then some personal history. I'm an architect, and I was trained partly on Erasmus in Barcelona in the 90s, before the 80s in fact, and just before the Olympic Games, and the city looked like this. So this was a period in Europe when cities were in a bad state. It looks like this now, and one can't deny that cities have been improved, so that the quality of architecture and urban planning in cities the last 20-30 years has improved spectacularly. And so I'm quite happy, because in my field of architecture and urban planning, you could say we've been doing a good job. We've been learning a lot, we've been developing a lot, and it has been successful. On the other hand, it's frustrating, because something in the end was wrong. We've been improving those cities for the inhabitants who now cannot afford anymore to inhabit a place where they were living before. And we all know this kind of graphs. So this is in Belgium, prices of housing, and the other one is the interest rate. So housing in Belgium, like in other countries, has been, the price of it doesn't depend on quality of urban development, on urban renewal. It has become a financial mechanism. Housing has become a commodity, and it's a financial system that defines the price of the housing. So what can we do? What are we doing in Brussels? Firstly, I think government should intervene much more in the market. It has been a kind of taboo for many years in the neoliberal period. I think we have to reclaim the right to intervene in the market. You could say that even I have a colleague once in a debate with I forgot, from Vienna, not Eva Kaili, but not an activist from Vienna who's also working for the Viennese government. She says, there is something wrong with your choice of words. So even the idea to intervene in the market is a choice of words, of terms, that is completely influenced by this kind of neoliberal ideology, as if the market is something where you normally should not intervene. Intervene is aggressive, is exceptional. One should say, housing is a basic right. The government of a country, the government of a city has to take care of basic rights. If the basic right is in danger, you have to do something. So we have to change also the rhetorics. We should change it into the protection. The government has the task to protect the basic right to housing. And we have a problem there, so you have to do something. So what do we do, for instance? We try with the Bouwmeesters team and also with the planning department of the region and with the urban permits, building permits department of the region. We try to impose housing in new projects. So for instance, in this private project for the renovation of 2 office towers of Proximus in the North Station, we imposed that there should be minimum 33% of housing. Just bluff, because there is no law on which you can, but we said, all of us on the public side said, we would like to have it. And so if you don't do that, you have the right not to do that, but you will have more difficult discussions with us, because that's what we want. Also on the level of law, of planning tools, there is a good example in Brussels, the Pad Heijvaart, the RPA, or the Plan d'Aménagement Directeur for the Heijvaart area, where for all projects above 2,000 square meters, there should be 25% social housing. So it is compulsory by law. I think we should generalize this on the level of the territory, the Brussels capital region. This will be the way to impose social housing everywhere, also in the municipalities who don't like social housing. And the idea is partially supported in the government. Second thing, we shouldn't go along with what the real estate sector proposes on solutions for affordable housing, because in most cases it's shrinking the apartments. And shrinking the apartments is a kind of negative spiral that is going down. And also you should know, for a real estate developer, it brings more money to sell a lot of small apartments instead of selling fewer larger apartments. So it's a false argument. So making smaller apartments will make apartments temporarily cheaper, but in the end, prices will go up anyway, because it's a financial system, mechanism that defines the prices. It's not a spatial architectural system. So that's why in the new Brussels Building Code, even if there was much lobbying from the side of private project developers to shrink the minimum size of the apartments, we didn't do it. So we kept the same minimum size of apartments as before. We should keep public land in public ownership. So we should convince CityDev, a public developer in Brussels, not to sell the land anymore, but to develop housing projects on the level of land leasehold on site. Because that means in 60 years or in 90 years, the public sector will still be involved in when in the next phase.
It's the discussion of tomorrow evening, and CityDev is coming. They're going to speak about this.
Yeah, and in the contrat de gestion of CityDev, it is said that they should try to, during, so for 25 I think, so they should try to develop at least 20% of their projects in the system of land leasehold. I think it's too modest. It could be more. Because if you buy an apartment at CityDev, now you're 30% subsidized. And this public money goes to private households and disappears. And one could say, okay, if you want to buy an apartment of CityDev, you will be subsidized in an indirect way that will say you don't have to pay for the land because we keep the land. But we ask you as a kind for what hoort wat, in return we ask you that you adapt your Belgian traditional way of owning a house. So you would only own the building and not the land. And if you adapt your mentality, you're welcome. That should be the way to convince people or to force people. The fourth thing is, so you have social housing, so public housing, social housing and the CityDev housing, for instance. You have private housing, of course. We think that in Belgium one should develop a third pillar of housing production, and that is something in between, that's cooperative housing. That means in some cases, and not LCLTB then, it's in fact private housing that's collectively owned. So that's why we think that a third pillar of production of housing based on collective land ownership should be really supported. Community Land Trust Brussels is one example of such a current or a stream or a production pillar of housing. But in another, of course, cooperatives of Zurich are very well known, is another example. But my hero of the moment is in fact Antonio Hodgers, who's a minister in Geneva, and who's responsible for stimulating cooperative housing in the city of Geneva since something like 10 or 15 years. And Geneva is a very good example for Brussels. Because if I tell Brussels people about Zurich, the answer is always, yes, but they speak German. It's another culture, it's another tradition, and they are partly right, because in Zurich, as was shown, it's already since the 19th century that this thing exists. While Geneva is a French-speaking city, and it's only since 10 years that there is a push to increase the number of cooperative housing in the city. And so this stimulus is done by the government in a very intentional way. So there was a decision, and since then they really promote it. They had something like 2% of cooperative housing in Geneva 10 years ago. Now they are above 5%, and they will go to 10%. So it's a city that shows that it is makeable, that you can change mentalities, that you can change traditions of real estate development, that you can change within the administration of the city the way that is dealt with housing. And so that's why it's a very telling example. And so that's why we've been promoting it everywhere, and that's why it's also Sarah who's supporting CLTB as well, is organizing a study trip to Geneva at the end of September. And some people of Brussels are going there, some people of Brussels political cabinets are going there, so I hope that they will learn a lot and that they will come back with ideas for Brussels. One last point, because you see, so the Bouwmeester is supporting cooperative housing. I can tell you more. We had an idea to launch a campaign in Brussels of sensibilization with an exhibition and so on. Perhaps it will happen in 24. So the reason is affordability. It's a huge issue in the city, but you could say it's not really a Bouwmeester issue. It's not about the quality of urban design and the quality of architecture. The second thing, but nevertheless, the second thing why we are in favor of cooperative housing is because it's kind of, it creates a kind of collective, common way of living in the city. But the main reason you could say, or the specific reason, and that is not always put on the table, because the other two reasons, well, you have better people explain it, like Hélène and so on, than us. The other reason is, and that's what we've been seeing, because we've been organizing several architectural competitions with CRTB, that these projects are better quality, because the probability that you have a client that has a specific ID is bigger than with a kind of generic private housing project or social housing project where you have standards, norms, the market wants this, always, these kind of golden rules. CLTB projects, or cooperative housing projects, there is already a group of owners, and these, or potential owners, or potential inhabitants, and they have an ID, they have a point of view. They're not always the same kind of cooperatives. In Barcelona you have a lot of cooperatives that with a very specific status, each of them. And so that gives better architecture, because there is an ID behind, because there is more personality, more character in those projects. And that's also a reason why for the Bouwmeester, cooperative housing is important. So if you don't do it for affordability, just do it for better architecture. That's it. Thank you.
Let's get back together, no? Yeah, I'll give 30 seconds for the one where maybe, that's good. Okay. Thank you very much for the 3 presentations. Now we have some time to discuss. Like, we have about, big half hour, 40 minutes discussion. And before I take questions, maybe I think it's important maybe to get some things clear and to launch the debate, and then we can just go around with questions. So the first thing I think would be relevant to kind of clarify is like, how does it work, inhabitant cooperative? Like, how does it function? Because it hasn't been explained, the difference between ownership and renting and this halfway. Would you feel comfortable giving a word on this? Hélène, maybe? Or that? Or, yeah? I mean, or you want me to do it?
Yep. And you are a tenant, on the other side you're the owner. And so you have rights and also duties or responsibilities. And you have to bring a share of the capital needed for maybe 20% of the costs. It would be a lot, or maybe too much. Or if you can go down with this capital